So after a win in Hungary, we'd only have to wait a week to once again watch Max Verstappen destroy 19 other men.
What did he say?
I mean, of course on the track that is, which this time out was in Belgium at Spa Francorchamps. A race I'm convinced that deep down at heart has always truly wanted to be a swimming pool, as race weekends are usually so wet that they make tropical rainstorms seem like a bit of light drizzle. Coming into round 12 and breaking news, Max Verstappen was leading the championship. Pretty sure instead of that line I can just add in a statement that says something like grass is green, still just as obvious. In fact, Max has averaged more points per weekend than you actually get for winning a race, cause maths and sprints and that. Further back though, and McLaren continued to close the gap to the top 4, having secured more points in Hungary. As in just 3 races, Lando Norris has managed to outscore Lance Stroll's entire season's points total.
I'm black. I'm yellow. I'm red.
I'm trash.
Hey guys, it's Taron and welcome to the On Track channel and to round 12 of the 2023 F1 season in Belgium. Now before we get going, as always, a little reminder to give the video a thumbs up if you do enjoy it, it really helps out with YouTube's algorithm, and don't forget to get yourself subscribed for all the rest of the content this year. Now with that out of the way, let's get into my honest review of Formula 1 and the 2023 Belgian Grand Prix. So given just a week between races, most of the action came immediately following the Hungarian Grand Prix. More specifically, up on the podium as Lando continued his quest to seek out death and destruction to all first place trophies, as after knocking over Max's P1 trophy in Silverstone, he took it a step further by breaking the Hungary first place trophy. Lando out here just casually destroying trophies in the same way that Max destroys all our hopes of a competitive race after lap 1. Honestly though, I think Lando's just on a mission to break them all at this point, just collecting broken trophies at every opportunity.
A fine addition to my collection.
Like, it's his attempt to stop Max technically winning every race. He's like, sorry mate, where's the P1 trophy? You actually need that for proof of winning. Though in all honesty, Max could probably make himself an entire replacement trophy in the time between him and second place crossing the finish line. Further back and in Parc Ferme, we had Lewis Hamilton congratulating Josh Pearce from the APX F1 team on a race win, meaning a fake F1 driver from a fake F1 team in a movie about F1 has won a race more recently than Lewis Hamilton. And then finally, over at Ferrari, after a shake-up over the winter, we got some news of another change of staff at the head of the team, as Laurent Mekies, current Ferrari race director, was officially announced to be headed to AlphaTauri to replace Franz Tost as their team principal. Pros saw an opportunity to get out of that mess and took it. Sadly for you, Charles, you're still under contract until the end of next year. On to the Friday now, and the first news was a 5-place grid penalty for Max Verstappen as he'd be taking a new gearbox, meaning instead of leading the race on lap 1, he'd probably have to wait until lap 2. Into the action though, and surprise surprise, it was raining heavily to start practice, which early on caught out Alex Albon as he headed straight on at the bus stop chicane. Down at Alpine, and clearly they'd been telling Pierre Gasly that he needed to be more like Alex, as he went and did exactly the same thing at exactly the same corner. Still, not quite as scary a moment as Yuki Tsunoda would have, with his AlphaTauri having a wobble halfway up Eau Rouge, but surviving with just a trip over the runoff. Sadly over at Williams, a trip in and out of the runoff was something that Logan Sargent could only hope for, as his Williams went straight on at Les Combes and straight into the barriers, ending his session after just 30 minutes. And sadly for the fans, given that the rain was coming down harder than Red Bull do on their drivers, that was just about it for practice. So before heading into qualifying and completely out of the blue, there was big news from Alpine, as they announced that they'd be parting ways with team principal Otmar Szafnauer, obviously not helped out by the team's poor run of form. Would probably also help if the drivers stopped crashing into each other. Into the action though, and although the rain had stopped, the track was still wet, but that meant 18 minutes of cars getting quicker and quicker, except Logan Sargent, who was stuck in the garage. Meanwhile, Lando Norris was doing his best not to get stuck in the gravel after going wide towards the end of the lap. Over at Haas, and Magnussen's onboard camera was picking fights with the green light in the pit box, but apparently that tactic gained you positions as K-Mag was through to Q2, unlike Daniel Ricciardo, who was through until he wasn't, with the stewards deleting his lap time.
You're just ruining it. Look at my lips, you're ruining it.
Into Q2, and with some wet lap times on the board, it was time for the phrase we all wanted to hear.
Prep the flicks.
Which, unfortunately for Esteban Ocon, didn't really go too well. However, for the other competent drivers, after a few laps of the track, the softs were starting to work, with the fastest time being shared about like a game of pass the parcel, but still somehow ending up with all the top 5 teams making it into Q3, with Verstappen just squeaking his way through in 10th place.
Yeah, I don't give a if I'm in P10. Just execution.
Okay, and then when the track was 2 seconds quicker for your final lap and you didn't have any energy left, how would that have gone down?
Damn! Into Q3 then, and with the weather settling in, it was soft tyres all the way, with Ferrari looking surprisingly good, having Leclerc on provisional pole and Carlos Sainz in 3rd behind Verstappen. So time for the second runs, eventually, as they all took an absolute age to leave the pit lane, with Leclerc approving his P1 with Carlos Sainz settling in behind, the McLarens then filling the second row, until Max Verstappen came along, taking that P1 by way over 0.8 of a second, still not on pole though because of his grid penalty. Into Saturday, and after a delay because Spa was inevitably more wet than the Pacific Ocean, we had the sprint shootout. All 19 drivers had the sprint shootout as Nico Hülkenberg left it so late to start a lap that, well, he didn't start a lap. But besides the likes of Norris and Alonso needing a good lap late on, the first session was pretty regular, with F1's resident snails of Haas and Alfa Romeo knocked out along with Tsunoda. Into SQ2, and it started with Logan Sargent doing his best Beyblade impression with the track still a bit damp. But with the track drying, to go on slicks you need to be one of the most skilled drivers to make it through, which meant it was just Lance Stroll on the mediums. Which inevitably didn't last too long as Lance went ploughing into the barriers to bring out the red flag, which also meant that both Astons were out, but did also mean that Lance had technically out-qualified Alonso.
Sometimes my genius is... it's almost frightening.
Into the final session, and after negotiating rush hour at the bus stop chicane, Perez went to the top of the times, with Sainz then jumping him and Oscar Piastri taking provisional pole with just one car to cross the line. That car was Max Verstappen, who went top by 11 thousandths to take another pole position and upset the entire Australian population. Onto the sprint, which got underway with absolutely no issues whatsoever. I'm kidding. Like seemingly every other session this weekend, it was delayed due to the weather, something becoming even more inevitable than Max Verstappen winning. When we did get going, however, it was a few laps behind the safety car, so many in fact that upon green flag racing, we had half the grid dive into the pits for intermediate tyres, with everyone looking to get some quick stops in to make sure they weren't held up when leaving, except Mercedes, who are still in the process of figuring out how to make a sub 5 second pit stop. Up at the front, and Max Verstappen had stayed out for another lap on the full wets.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
It didn't, as he was jumped by Oscar Piastri, who for the first time was leading an F1 race. And with everyone now on the intermediate tyres, we could really get underway with the action, until Fernando Alonso went spinning off into the gravel and got himself stuck, which brought out the safety car. Once we finally got going then, it was just 4 corners and half a straight before Max was back into the lead, as he followed Piastri up through Eau Rouge and slipstreamed his way past, but Piastri leading was fun while it lasted. Further back, and given Max was doing well, it meant Checo was struggling, as he went wide, allowing Hamilton to come up the inside and get himself wheel to wheel with the Red Bull, or as it turned out, wheel to side pod with the Red Bull, with the pair making contact and Hamilton getting a 5-second penalty which would eventually relegate him to 7th. And for Sergio, the damage to his car meant that he would eventually have to retire, but not before losing places and helping to remind Ferrari fans that there is such a thing as moving forward during a race. But for the sprint, however, that was about it, as Max Verstappen would take the win with Oscar Piastri in second, the Australian picking up his, what do you call it again?
First, I would say podium, but I don't really know what this is, so first top 3 in a sort of race.
On to Sunday, and with clear skies for a change, we started the race on time, with Sergio Perez electing to defend P2 with his life it seemed, but it paid off for the Mexican. In behind though, and Carlos Sainz, well, not the best start from him, as he locked up into turn 1, pinching Piastri on the inside, with the pair both sustaining damage by the end of turn 1. For the Spaniard, he was doing his best personation of Checo's car from yesterday, but for Piastri, it was terminal, having to retire from the race before even the end of lap 1. Up at the front, and it was a return to 2022 for Charles Leclerc and his pole position. By that, I mean Charles was in P1 on Saturday, and then very quickly passed by a Red Bull on Sunday. This left Leclerc to become the driver of the first of 2 Ferrari trains, as he held up Hamilton and Verstappen in 3rd and 4th, and teammate Sainz held up, well, the rest of the grid, with Carlos losing multiple places every single lap, with that damage turning his Ferrari into a McLaren. But Taron, McLaren are good, right? Not today, as Lando Norris spent his early stint dropping like a stone, as McLaren had lost pace at the race Alpine were losing employees. Back into the Leclerc train, and clearly Max Verstappen was fed up of being a passenger, as he decided he wanted to drive, getting past Hamilton on the inside at the end of the Kemmel Straight, and then getting past Leclerc around the outside just a couple of laps later. Further back, and George Russell found himself in the company of the 2 Aston Martins, with Alonso getting past George into the bus stop chicane and then pulling away from Stroll and Russell. But for George, not all was lost, as into Les Combes a couple laps later he managed to get past Stroll round the outside. Back up at the front, and after a set of pit stops for the top 4, Verstappen was closing in on Perez, as he breezed by to take the lead with the aid of DRS on lap 17 at the end of the Kemmel Straight. Still, at least it wasn't on lap 2. But with the lead sorted, our attention turned to the weather radar, as in certain places there were drops of rain, as even though it had rained all weekend long, this race could really still use some more, with even race leader Max Verstappen starting to struggle, almost losing it through a rouge, with some drivers decided to come in and pit for the soft tyres, with George Russell being one of them and the soft tyres proving to be the most effective, getting past cars with ease on their worn-out mediums. Sadly for us fans, that was the end of the rain, and it was back to bright sunshine. And with no action up at the front, eyes turned to a battle just outside the points between Gasly and Albon, with the pair going side by side through the chicanes and Gasly keeping his car ahead to take away 11th place. But as we know, that Williams is a rocket ship in a straight line, meaning Albon could get back alongside on the straight, but not quite enough to retake the position. At this point, Esteban Ocon said, "Anything you can do, I can do better," as he eyed up Yuki Tsunoda for 9th, going round the outside of Yuki at Les Combes, coming just millimetres from the AlphaTauri but getting it done. At this point though, with the action drying up, the entertainment came courtesy of Max Verstappen's radio, with race engineer GP telling Max to look after his tyres, and Max replying,
No, I don't think I will.
Sadly for the fans, no stop meant all the top runners stayed as they were, besides Hamilton nicking the fastest lap, with Verstappen taking an 8th win in a row, followed up by Sergio Perez and then Charles Leclerc, with repeat guests from Azerbaijan and Austria appearing on this week's edition of the Max Verstappen podcast. But anyways, that is all for now. I hope you've enjoyed, and I hope you stick around after the summer break. If you have enjoyed it, do give the video a thumbs up and get subscribed for all that content later this year. But until next time, take care.